You are listening to the Heir Flow Podcast, and I'm your host, Rickey Thomas. Welcome to the one and only weekly podcast that provides information and inspiration that will help you live your life like the heir that you were created to be. So sit back, relax, and flow with me. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Heir Flow Podcast. I'm your host, Rickey Thomas, and I am so excited to have you all here today. I thank you for taking time out of your day to spend time with me as we embark on this new journey. So today I want this podcast, this episode to be very intimate. One, because it is episode 1. And I think with this, I want to share with my audience and potential audience, I want to make sure I establish who I am. I think that's very important from the beginning to do. Talk about why I decided to start a podcast and, dig into why the name and, just kind of what to expect in future episodes. So, I'm committed to do this thing. And I decided to do this for a lot of different reasons. So, just so everybody understands who I am, I am Rickey Thomas, as I mentioned before, but Rickey Thomas Jr. I am one of 3 Rickeys. My father, Rickey Thomas Sr., and I have my son, my oldest son, who's 15, is Rickey Thomas III. We call him Trey. My dad, growing up, when I was younger, he was a DJ in Detroit. So, he's good on the microphone, radio, always talking to people. My dad definitely has the gift of gab. He can come into the room, mingle with anybody. And, I think I pick up a lot of that from him. And, just in talking with, my wife and my kids, I'm happily married, 19 years, which is crazy to believe. I've been married for 19 years and my wife doesn't look a day over 21. So, I'm blessed. I'm very blessed to have a wife, 3 wonderful kids, as I mentioned. I've got, mentioned my son, who's 15, our oldest, our daughter, she's 18, just turned 18. Not too long ago, she's on her way to college. So she's going to be a scholar athlete. And then our youngest isn't going into 5th grade. So, we've got kids in all stages right now, so it's definitely, it's an interesting time. But for me, born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, I was fortunate to have both my parents in the house. My mom and dad, worked hard. My mom, ever since I've known her, she worked for Sears and Roebuck, with different positions. My dad, started off working for Northwestern Dodge, at least what I remember as a kid. Then he went to work for AAA for the bulk of those years growing up. And then he left AAA and, worked at different jobs around in the car industry, still in automotive in some way, shape, form, or fashion. He's retired now. It's interesting because, he's kind of back working again at Home Depot, and he's doing well. He's like Mr. Home Depot now. But I love my dad. I love my mom. My mom passed away about 15 years ago, and she was definitely somebody who was a heavy influence. Just like my father. But they raised 4 kids. I've got an older sister. I've got my younger sister, and then our youngest sibling is our brother. We're all married, all got kids. All had our different journeys that we've been going through. But, growing up in the house, so I love, there was a lot of things that was good about families, from a family standpoint. And so, it was never about being perfect. That's the one thing that I loved about my upbringing. It was, being who you are, finding your own path, because, each one of my siblings, we all do something different. You know, different industries. We all went to different schools, especially for high school. You know, we all kind of went to the same elementary school for the most part. But you know, we kind of went our own ways. But there's one thing that we do have in common, and that was our love for families. And so, like I said, we're all married, and it wasn't a forced upon like, oh, you've got to get married, but we saw the value of family. And, you know, so, you know, all of us have, you know, had relationships that worked, some that didn't work, but, you know, we're all married, happily married, all have children, and we're wanting to continue to build upon the family legacy of our family, just to continue to grow and, you know, give our kids, you know, give our kids the life that, you know, our parents desired to give us, and they gave us a great life. Like I said, they worked hard. You know, we were, you know, part of that middle class. You know, that if you can look at kind of the typical American family, you know, mom and dad, 4 kids, you know, 2 boys, 2 girls, you know, brick house in Detroit, Michigan, lived there. My dad still lives in the house that I grew up in. You know, it's one of those things where you think about, what does the prototypical family look like? And, you know, I say that because even in that, there are challenges. There were some dysfunctions. And this podcast is not here to talk about the dysfunction. It's to celebrate the greatness of the family and why it's good, because you can deal with dysfunction if you have a good family. Being blessed to have a mom and dad, being blessed to have, you know, brothers and sisters who are supportive. You know, we're typical. There are times where we don't like each other. There's times where we get on each other's nerves, but, you know, at the end of the day, we've got each other's back, and that's what I love about my family. And my wife's family is the same way, you know, and we try to instill that in our children, that, you know, you have to make sure that you're taking care of each other as a family, and believe in strong family bonds. And so I'm going to skip around a little bit, because I know I was going to tie that into, you know, kind of going into a flow. But, you know, we talk about family, you talk about, you know, the name of the podcast. And it's called Heir Flow. And Heir is spelled H-E-I-R. And, you know, that comes from the clothing line, the clothing brand that God gave me in a time of prayer and fasting a few years ago. And, you know, I had been, you know, desiring to come up with something that, you know, was catchy, something that was, you know, just had a good meaning, and I thought would be, you know, kind of a trendy name. And, you know, God hit me with billionaire. He said Billionaire Flow. And so, you know, I spelled it out. I wrote it down, and, you know, I spelled it like the normal way you spell billionaire, you know, Billionaire. And, you know, it's like, okay, Billionaire Flow, I get it. You know, I hear a lot of pastors and a lot of people say, you know, even outside of the church, you know, I'm in that millionaire flow, you know, and God was like, well, we got to elevate that. You're a billionaire, you know, don't limit yourself, you know, think higher. But he was like, but it's not billionaire in terms of the money you have. It's billionaire, H-E-I-R, because, you know, one thing about me is that I am a believer. And being a believer, you know, you have to understand that once you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you become an heir to his kingdom. And with that comes, you know, there's riches and wealth obviously in that, but the wealth is more than money. The wealth is happiness in your relationships. The wealth is, you know, being able to do the things that you love to do, whether it costs you money or not. It's being able to get up each day with a sense of purpose, and to go to sleep each day thinking that I've moved a step closer towards that purpose, or I've been walking in that purpose. It's a general feeling, not just a feeling, but that you are truly walking out the promises that were given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this podcast is not going to be, it's not a preachy thing. I don't want people to think, oh, we're about to go through another church sermon. But believe me, I'm going to reference things that are biblical because that is in my nature. I'm not going to sit here and just rattle off scripture all day. Because again, it's important. It's part of who I am. And I may reference scripture at times. Because again, I think it's important to make sure that, from my stance, this is where I am. So, please believe me, this podcast is going to give a lot of information about, building wealth. And I want to make sure that you understand that wealth is more than just money. It's family, it's relationship, it's health. It's, we're talking about marriages. We're going to have people on this show that are going to discuss things. They're going to tell their story. They're going to give their testimony of how they, you can say rags to riches. You can say they start walking in their purpose and they saw God move them to different areas and how things were coming together without them having to toil. And that is what being an heir. That is what being wealthy. Wealthy is a combination of things. Money is a tool. Money is something that the value is only going to be as good as you make it in terms of what you use it for. You can't buy happiness. You can use money to fund things, to fund the things that make you happy when you're doing them. Money can't give you joy. That's going to only come from the Lord. And so I share these things and these stories because, I look at people that I know personally, people that I've read about from afar. And I look at it to get inspiration, to understand, like, how did they get there? What got you over that hump? Many of us, especially since the pandemic, have been really wanting to start businesses. And, some of us have done well and started businesses and, have begun to really, transition our mode of thinking in terms of, who we rely on, who we are. And that, again, that is part of being an heir. It's knowing that, our source is not our jobs. Our source is not our bank account. Our source is, if you're a believer, your source should be God. And so as we continue to unpack and talk to folks, I think you're going to see a reoccurring theme, because it's a journey of faith. It's a journey of faith. It's a journey of, overcoming. This is not going to be a podcast where, we're dishing tea or sipping tea, spilling tea. No, we're not doing that. And we're not going to be a gossip show. This podcast is not dedicated to sports talk, politics, unless again, it's to a place where somebody is, moving up through the ranks and they have a story that involves that. But we're not discussing people's political views. This isn't the podcast for that. So I want to set that groundwork up now. I don't want people to be disappointed. They come to this podcast and they want to hear, about their favorite sport or sport team or the hot topic of the day. That's not what we're about. That's not what this podcast is for, at least. This podcast is for those that want to be inspired. In my intro, I mentioned that, this is the one and only weekly podcast that's going to provide information and inspiration that will help you live your life like the heirs that you were created to be. And I say that because, a lot of times we forget who we are and whose we are in our process. We get wrapped up into, we've got to do this to make sure that we survive. We've got to do these things. It's on us. It's all on us. If we fail, it's on us. And we start to get this mentality that, it's almost like, I know that there's a God, but I don't behave like there's a God. And so if my thoughts are not of God and on God, and knowing that I am God and that I am God's creation, and I'm under God's covenant and protection. If I don't think like that, then my actions will start to reflect my thoughts. And then I will start to attract what I'm thinking. So understanding that mindset, that poor man's way of, you hear it all the time, that's a poor way of thinking, and it's so true. Our thoughts can really overtake our actions, and it can really drive us to be what we say we are. You hear it in the Bible, power, the power of the tongue is life and death, and the power of the tongue, power of the tongue. You hear that there's I think there was a documentary that was out, a few years ago called The Secret. You talk about the power of attraction, and you hear people talk about vibrations, and, you vibrate at a certain frequency, and your vibration can attract or repel people or things or, whatever, based off of how you're vibrating. So you start to hear some of these philosophic and scientific things behind it, but ultimately it just comes back to you are what you say. And it sounds simplistic, but it's really not. It's not easy, because over the years we have been trained to think a certain way, to live a certain way, to do certain things. It is, and there's nothing wrong with some of that, right? I think if you do that and you realize when your walk with God that you are called to be a carpenter, then you be the best carpenter ever. If you are called to be a school teacher, then you go out there and you be the best school teacher that you can be. You innovate in that space. You figure out how to reach the kids where they are. You work through that. And I see people that are doing that. I'm going to have some persons on this podcast, God willing, that can talk a little bit more about that. But I want to have people from different industries to really discuss. It's not about, entrepreneurship. Yes, that is great. We should be entrepreneurs. You should own something. You should own land. You should take dominion over this land. And I believe that wholeheartedly, but also believe that you can also take dominion over corporate America. If your aspirations and your desires, and you're being called to lead a Fortune 500 company that you may not own, but you may be put in that position to open the door for other people to come in that company and be successful. You could be the trailblazer for that. And that's fine. I don't want to have the narrative that you're only going to be an heir if you are, if you're a business owner. No. It's about doing what you are called to do, what you are led to do, doing what you're passionate about. There are people that are passionate about being a teacher. There are people that are passionate about being police officers, firefighters, working in government, politics. There are people that are passionate about that. And they want to be chefs. They want to work as entrepreneurs. They want to be an entrepreneur. They want to own businesses. They want to be real estate investors or real estate brokers, or, there's so many avenues that you can be successful based off of what you desire. The main thing is figuring out what that is, what makes you happy, what brings you passion. Speaking to the things that you desire to do and internalizing that, and then putting yourself in a position to where you are seeing those things constantly. They're always in front of you. People think it is so, I think it's so, like, I don't want to say basic but you hear people talk about vision boards, and the church that I attend, Living Truth Christian Center, Smyrna, Tennessee, I'm thankful for what I learned there, what I've learned there since I've been there, what I continue to learn from our spiritual father, Apostle Amos L. Howard Sr. You know, his testimony is, and I'm going to put it out there in the air. I desire to have him on here, and I'm going to work on making sure I can get him on here. But his testimony about coming from debt, coming from the challenges that he's had, just in life in general, and to be in the position that he is today, and a lot of his story, is some of the foundational things that we're going to talk about consistently throughout this podcast. You have to see yourself being out of debt. You've got to, he talks about creating a vision board. He was one of the first people that I've ever, that in the church, the ministry, they were one of the first, people that I've ever heard say, create a vision board, and actually have a class or have a tutorial on doing it and showing his vision board. And then, seeing the things that they put on the vision board, and not just taking the time to cut out some stuff and make it look all pretty and stick it up on the board, and then you walk past it and just, it's there, but actually speaking to it, making sure that it's that the vision is kept before you, that you continuously speak to those things, and then you have it as a memory and kind of a graphical way to recollect what God has done for you, whether it's within, a few days, a few weeks, a few months, but at the end of, if you just make it a yearly, say every year in January, I'm going to go and make a new vision board, and if I work the process and I truly believe that the things on this board, I will be able to cross them out, or however you choose to mark it, to say, put a date on it saying God brought this forth on this date. Now, the other part of providing information is to understand that you can create all the vision boards you want. You can speak to it all you want. You can believe all you want. But there's another piece to it. In your time of prayer, in your time of spending that precious time with God, you're going to be given instructions on what you should be doing. And if you're not doing, if there isn't a, response in terms of an action or set of actions from what God is trying to get you, because you got to go out there, you got to do the work. There are times when God will just tell you, just be patient, sit on your hands, wait for me. So your work is your faith, making sure that you're keeping yourself grounded in that faith so that doubt doesn't creep in and turn you from the thing that you believe in, or the things that you're believing God for. And sometimes people look at faith like that is not work. But when you are in warfare, for people that say, man, I got haters all around me, and my family don't believe, and my friends don't believe, and just people I'm acquainted with don't believe, and I'm telling people this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen, and it ain't happening, and I feel like a fool sometimes, but I'm gonna stand on it because I know what God told me, and it's gonna be so. And sometimes you get to that place where it's like, God, it is so hard for me to sit here and continue to say that I have these things, that I'm doing these things, and they don't show up. And so you feel like, now I've got to go make them happen, instead of just letting God be God. And sometimes it's easy, God will tell you, I'll my testimony, one of the things I can testify about in that regards is, this was probably about, I guess it's been about 11 years now. My wife and I, we were going through some financial challenges, and, we were just we really wanted to, take some different vacations. We wanted to pay some things off, and we just needed more income to come in the house. And so, I just remember, sitting there, and I was just saying, like, you know what, I'm going to give me a second job, make some extra money, and, we'll see what happens. I'm just going to work. I'm just going to work myself, because that's all I knew. That was instilled in me. You just got to work hard, work overtime. I remember my mom used to work overtime. Like, I'm gonna work some overtime, and I can buy, so I can get y'all, these toys and all this stuff that you want for Christmas. So I'm gonna work overtime. My dad is like, well, I can do some of this and do some of that, and that was the mentality: work more. And ladies and gentlemen, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with working. There are going to be times where you have to put in extra hours. You have to put in extra time to get what you need. You're going to have to work a second job to get to where you need to go to. You may have to Lyft or Uber or DoorDash or whatever to make some extra money. But my problem wasn't going out and working a job. It was that I was praying and asking God, for a sign of, when do I know I should leave, or should I leave? And I didn't really pray to God beforehand and take the job. But in the process, my work schedule was crazy. I was getting up. I get up at 6 a.m, was when I usually had to get up, to go to my regular career job working in IT. And so my wife, she used to have to go to work. We had different schedules. So she would go to work at a certain time, and she wouldn't get off until a certain time. So, she worked a later shift than me some of those, through some of that period. And so, I would be responsible for taking our daughter to school or to daycare. And, our son, our older son, our middle child, he was, going to daycare. And so, I was making sure that they were dropped off, or, get to where they needed to go, because my wife had to be at work at a certain time. And so I would get a few hours of sleep. I would get up from a few hours of sleep from the night before, working at my part-time job. I was at FedEx. So I'm at FedEx overnight, working 4 or 5 hours, sometimes longer if they gave me overtime. I was loading trucks. Here I am, with, got a computer science degree from Tennessee State University. And, I've got a job working, in IT as a software tester. And, I'm loading trucks. I used to talk to a lot of the guys there, and it was interesting, because they used to look up to me like, man, why are you working here? You don't even have to be here. And, I said, well, there's some things that I want to be able to do for my family, some things that we want to pay off, some things that, want to have some extra cash flow in. So this is why I'm here. And, they were just like, oh, I respect that, and a lot of the managers respected that. And I was always on time. When I worked, I was always, I did a great job, and they loved having me there, almost to the point where they were trying to move me up into a management role. And I didn't want to do that because I knew this was just something part-time. But it was difficult. And so to get back, on a point, it was difficult to wake up every evening. So I would have to leave my family. So keep in mind, my wife, she's at home at night with, our daughter, who's the oldest, our son, who's the second child, and she was pregnant with our youngest. And I'm driving from, one side of town all the way to the other. It's probably about 20-some minute drive for me to get to, that evening job. So, I go through, imagine, you drop your kids off, then you go into your main job. You come home from the main job, pick them up from, daycare or school, homework, you feed them, spend some time with them. For me, I at some point I needed to take a nap, but, I wanted to spend time with my children. Then my wife would come home and I wanted to talk to her. And so, again, it was tough because, we were like my wife and I were like ships passing the night. I started working that job before we got pregnant with our son. And, my wife tells her that, it happened because she was missing me. We were missing each other, and we were. My wife and I, we talk a lot, and it was just a lot. And so I felt the weight of it. I truly felt the weight of that whole situation. And so I remember there was times where I would cry out to God. There were times where, I was in the truck and I was speaking in tongues. Nobody was in there with me. And I think somebody walked past and I didn't care at that point. It was like, look, I am exhausted. I am tired. I am, I'm over this. And I would say, God, when can I leave? And, in my mind, I'm thinking like, God, like I never told you to go there in the first place. And I remember at one point, I remember vividly hearing God say, leave, trust in me and leave. And I didn't do it. My pastor, Apostle Howard, he told me to leave. My wife told me to leave. Like, if it's too hard, and me trying to be the macho thing, like, oh, I got it, I got to do what I got to do for my family. And again, there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you have to do. But at that time, I didn't have to do that. I had to work my faith. That was the work that I needed to do. So I did this job. I did it for a year and a half. A year and a half. And it got easier, obviously, after a while, but it was still hard to leave my family. Because I was working, both jobs Monday through Friday. So on the weekends, I was like toast. I was gone. Friday night you get off your regular job, or Friday, afternoon you get off your regular job, and like, it's the weekend and everybody's hyping, but daddy's got to go to work. Come home Saturday morning and the family is just, they're wanting to go hang out, and, my wife's trying to do what she can to take the kids out, and, and it was tough. And so I tell that story to say, I got to like a crossroads. And, I always tell, I share this with anybody that I talk to about this story. We had a family reunion on my dad's side of the family down in Miami. And my brother-in-law, he stayed down in Miami. He used to stay in Miami, there in Fort Lauderdale now, but they were in Miami. And, I had got off of work from the second job. We got some sleep, and then we got up, sometime that morning, and we drove down to Miami. And so it's me, my wife who was pregnant, our two kids. We drive down to Miami, and our first stop was going to be we're going to stay with my brother-in-law. So we stop at his house, we talk for a while, see him and the family, and then I went to sleep. And this is, when people say, they hear from God, I truly heard from God. I was in, my wife and I were in our niece's bed, and I remember taking that nap, and I remember vividly, I thought I was dreaming. It's almost like you have one of those outer body experiences, but I remember God saying, Rickey, he said, son, you're asking me when to leave, and I've told you to leave. You have to trust me, believe in me, trust and put your faith that everything is going to be okay. Leave the job. And at that moment, I had a moment of clarity. And I had some fear that welled up in me. And the fear was just, but you're not going to have that money. That was the natural side of me. That money's going to be gone. You won't have that cushion of that extra money. And so, I remember telling my wife, and I said it in fear, I said, I heard from God. And she was like, you did? It was like, God told me to quit. Put in my notice. And of course she looked at me and was like, well, I told you that a long time ago. Typical. I told you that a long time ago. You don't listen to me. And it's not that I didn't listen, but again, fear. Fear is a powerful thing. But I was just scared to. And I didn't have, the funny thing about it is I never had a timetable to say, I'm only going to work for this long. I didn't think I was going to work for a year, 6 months even. I was there for 18 months. And most of that was because of me not operating in faith. That was an action, And so, long story short, we came back from the trip. I put in my 2 weeks notice. I left the second job, and, right after our youngest was born, I received a job making, more money than I was making at both of the jobs I was working before combined. So see, God was telling me that I was a covenant child. He was telling me that if I believed in him, he will provide everything that I desire. He already provided our need. I just didn't work my faith so that those things will manifest. They could have manifested a lot before that. And so I sit there and I wonder, like, how many things have I prolonged as an heir? How many things? So when people ask about this podcast, why the name? Why are we here? Why should I listen to you? Or why should I listen to your guest? Because everybody here is going to have something that they're bringing to the table that is going to talk about why you should flow as an heir. Why should you be in a better position than what you're in? And see, we're just giving you the information. Here's the information. I remember a pastor a few years back came to our church. His name is Dr. Mike Freeman. He's out the Baltimore, Maryland area. And he said something, and that has stuck with me, ever since then. And this has been a while now. So, it's probably been about, almost 10 years. I think when he first came to the church. And he said, give me information and I'll draw my own inspiration. And that thing was so powerful to me. And I bring it up a lot of times because, people always look to be inspired. They watch a movie to be inspired. Oh, that was a great movie. It made me feel good. It inspired me to want to be better. But see, what he said, a lot of people miss some things. He said, give me information and I'll draw that action. I'll draw my own inspiration. See, there's an action there, draw being the verb. There is an action that's going to take place. I'm going to draw my own inspiration. That's what this podcast really embodies. We're going to give you information, and you have to go out there, research it, pray about it. If you're the praying type of person, pray about it. And then take action. Take action. And believe me, there are so many times that I have gotten stuck in this rut of being so inspired to do so many things, but there's no action. I didn't pray about it. I didn't write down a plan. I didn't make a vision about what it is that I wanted to do or seek God for the vision. I just totally was left that inspired. And again, I go back to how many things as an heir that God has waiting for me and my family. How many things have I prolonged by stagnant inspiration? Because like anything that is stagnant, it starts to stink. it dies. Inspiration is meant to have movement, just like water. Water is not meant to stand still. It's meant to have movement, to stay clean and pure, that you can partake in it and drink it. Well, inspiration's the same way. Stagnant inspiration becomes stale. And it becomes a deferred dream, or it just becomes, another one of those things that you say, man, I remember, I wanted to do something like that. People say, what happened? I just never did it. And the excuses come out. Well, work and everything else, and I just didn't get to it. And you look up and you could have had an inspiration to start a business, and you look up and somebody else has done that business. Somebody else has taken that idea and run with it. And then you get defeated. It's like, oh, well, somebody else beat me to it. I guess I just, keep doing what I'm doing. And you give up. So this podcast is meant for more than just inspiration. If you're a lazy person, you're not going to do much. God's going to take care of you, but you're going to get what you get. One of my youngest son's teachers told him, I think in first grade, she used to have this saying, you get what you get, and you don't throw a fit. And that's what she used to tell the kids. If they do something, they do something they're not supposed to do, or, they make a decision that, wasn't the best decision or whatever. She would say that to them, and he would come home, and I remember my wife and I were saying something, and she was like, oh, I wish I should have did this, and blah, 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 or, something. And he would come out and say, Mommy, you get what you get, and don't throw a fit, and it's funny, but I mean, that's the truth. You are what you say, you get what you get. You speak a certain way, it's going to, your mindset is going to absorb that, and you're going to manifest that. So that's why it's important. That's why this podcast is important to me. That's why the name Heir Flow is important. And just, and again, God just hit me with this as I'm sitting here talking to you, and we're talking about air flow. There has to be a flow, no stagnation. Inspiration can't be stagnant. You get information, and you can sit on information for a while. But if the information, for it to be powerful, you've got to have something to push it so you can get that inspiration, and it becomes something, it manifests itself. So you're flowing. If you're air flowing, if you're flowing, that means that you're getting the information, you're getting your inspiration, and you're acting on that. You're creating. You're moving. Whether it's moving your faith needle, whether it's, going out there to work out, exercise, and get yourself in the best shape of your life, whether it's going from, a short order cook, or somebody is flipping fries at McDonald's, to a short order cook, to, owning catering companies, whether it's leaving that technology job that you've been working and everybody just said, oh, this is a great job, you'll make a lot of money, because we know that field makes a lot of money, to go doing what you're passionate about and opening a food truck. I've got inspirations all around me. And not just for what God has done for me. And I can sit here and talk all day about what God has done for me and my family. And I'm going to share some of that. I mean, that's part of this podcast. I want to share some of that. But we'll have other episodes. We'll be here for a while. I plan to keep this going. I don't care if I've got one person that gets inspired from some of the stuff we share. I'm going to keep moving with this because I am passionate about sharing information. I want people to get inspired and move and make things happen. I want to see people win. I want to see everybody be prosperous in all areas of your life. Spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially. I want you to understand how to invest. Getting information and being able to research that information to know how to spend your money, not necessarily telling you what to buy, but things that you should be investing in long term, short term, I can't even speak, short term, mid-term. I want you to be able to diversify. You hear people say diversify your portfolio. I want you to diversify your life. Get out of the normal day-to-day 9 to 5. If you're looking to travel more, look at expanding out the places you can go to. There's nothing wrong with going to Atlanta. There's nothing wrong with going to New Orleans. There's nothing wrong with going to, Miami or, LA or places like that, New York. There's nothing wrong with those places. But if you say, I aspire to be a traveler, even if it's say, you know what, I'm going to take a trip to Mexico. That's a start. And don't let anybody make you feel bad about it. If you're a person who's never traveled outside of your city or your state, start with going to another state. If you're somebody who's traveled throughout the United States, say I'm going to go find a country that's close by. But diversify your life. Do more than what you did in the previous times. If you got to take time to save up, you know what? We're going to have people on here. They're going to share information about how to budget your money, about how to, do things. They offer services. Part of this is going to be networking with people, helping them, share what they do for their business, because I know it's something that people need services that people need. And connecting them with this audience and their audience with me and networking. So we have people that understand about it, investing in stocks, people who understand about 401ks, people that understand about, life insurance, people that understand about travel, people that understand about real estate. Things that, just understanding, credit. All kind of financial services. I want to make sure that all that stuff is a part of this. Being able to manage your money is important, but, you can't manage what you can't measure. You got to know where you are. You got to be honest with yourself. You got to be honest with yourself with where you are and all those things I mentioned before, spiritually, mentally, physically, financially, emotionally. You got to be able to know that. And so a lot of this is going to be some, I have to do some self, introspect and really look at where you are and be honest with yourself. Being honest and tearing down the walls. It's going to be important. You don't have to be perfect. Being an heir is not about being perfect. Heir Flow Podcast is not a bunch of perfect people with a perfect plan that's executed perfectly every time. You're going to hear things that happen that we wanted it to be perfect. I'm just going to take this podcast, this episode. You know how many times I've sat here and recorded and stopped because I want to make sure it sounded perfect. Oh, I don't like my voice on this part. Oh, I didn't say that word quite right. I focus so much on trying to be perfect versus letting my heart be heard and making sure that the audience understood. I delayed this episode being done. And that might seem like a basic example, but it's the truth. I could have probably had this episode done a long time ago. But I tried to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect, ladies and gentlemen. You don't. You just have to keep working to be the best you that you can be. what you've done in your past that was wrong, it's your past. If God has forgiven you and you've forgiven yourself, and if you sought forgiveness from the person that you did wrong, or if it wasn't a person you did wrong, but it was just something that you needed to get right with God and yourself, do that and move on. Don't hold yourself hostage by your past. Trust me, I know. That thing can haunt you and bother you, and you look up at it and you're behind where you're supposed to be because you're so worried about what's behind you. Your past is supposed to help. It's supposed to be a reminder of how far you've come. Your past is supposed to propel you and help to accelerate you to your present and your future. But it's just like driving. Eventually, if you're always looking behind you, you're going to crash. And that's when the challenges in life come. That's when things really start to get out of whack. You start getting away from the source. And I use this example all the time. It's just like a cell phone. The further you get out of, in a rural area that has no cell phone towers, the further you get away from your source, what happens? Your signal gets weak. Your call breaks up. If you're on a call, your voice starts sounding crazy. Your data doesn't work quite right. It's slow. Just things aren't working the way they're supposed to. Isn't that how life is? You get away from God. As a believer, you get away from God as your source. You get away from His word. You get away from what you know works. And then all of a sudden you get back in it. You get back in range and things start working right. Things start to come into view. I see clearer now. I can make it. You're optimistic. Your viewpoint changes. You even start to speak differently. You're speaking the word. You're believing it. You're internalizing it. Everything is going good. And then you fall off again because, I made it to the next place, or I made it to where I need to go. But the consistency has to be there. And I'm talking to myself. I could have had businesses a long time ago. Probably could have did the podcast a long time ago. I could have done so many things. My desire is to one day, be at a place where I can walk away from my job, but have more than enough streams of income to supplement the way we live and increase the way we live. But it's a mindset, and it's getting out of fear. And then it's putting in the work. I've got tons of information. I don't know how many seminars, how many things I've read, people I've talked to, business ideas have been pitched my way. I mean, my wife and I, we position ourselves to be able to do more. And we make some investments and we do some things, but, just not really totally submerging ourselves into that. How many of you guys have done that before or are doing that now? And think about it, like how much time have I caused myself from being at the place where I see myself going to, or my family? Great thing about it is, God is a redeemer of time. You're never too old. You're never too old to get that doctorate degree. I saw it this year. It was beautiful. I watched so many graduations. Besides my daughters, so many people have graduated. And I remember looking at some of the colleges, especially the college that my daughter's going to be attending next year for their doctorate program and masters. I saw so many folks who are a little more seasoned, but they continue to get their education. They continue to pursue a higher level of education, even if they were just getting their undergrad degree. But I saw, people getting their bachelors, getting their masters, getting their doctorates, their PhDs. I saw that, and I'm like, man. And the happiness and the satisfaction that they had, that's flowing. That's airflow. That's wealth. that's something that they had a desire to do, and to accomplish that. But it doesn't stop right there. That's just a footnote. There's so much more to do in your life. Every day that we get up and breathe, that means that we have so much more living to do. And you may not physically feel like it. You may not physically, you may get up each day and be like, oh, I'm tired, I'm sore. But you know what? You got up. There's nothing wrong with resting here and there, but you got up, and you got to keep that mindset like, I have a purpose here. And remember that. Every day that you get up and you're walking as the air and you're living and you're breathing, you've got a purpose, and you got a reason to flow. You've got inspiration that you can create. You have inspiration that you can share with people. Your story, some people, they downplay their stories. They downplay their testimony. Everybody has a story. Every believer has a testimony. You've gone through some things. You think they're small, but for other people, they're like, man, how did you deal with that? How'd you deal with that? I get, in my life, I've had so many people come up saying, I'm really inspired by you and your wife and your family, and how y'all do this and how y'all do this and how y'all carry yourselves. And, I sit there like, man, they just don't know. And it's not to downplay what God has done for us, but I'm just thinking like, like, how did you get through it? And you start to think about it, like, well, how did I get through this? It was God, but it was also me making up in my mind about different things, whatever it was. People say about my marriage, my wife and I married 19 years now. How did y'all last that long? Like, y'all didn't want to fight and hurt each other. And I'm going to have my wife on here now. And she's going to tell you that, the same truth, just like anything. With any relationship, you have to work at it. The same thing we say about, they say anything that you want, you have to work for it. Doesn't have to be a physical work. It can be, just through prayer. It can be through faith. But there's work that has to be done. And you have to do the work yourself. I can't blame my wife for my marriage not being what it needs to be. I can't focus on holding her hostage and I'm not doing my job. I got to take care of my job. I got to do what I'm supposed to do as the husband. That's what God told me to do. You do the things that you're called to do, that I'm called to do as a husband. She does the things that she's called to do as a wife. One of us are out of line, he's going to take care of that. And so, we're going to touch upon some of that stuff, that's stuff to come, so, just kind of bringing it back around, with this podcast is about, I think you heard a lot about who I am, things that I think about, where I'm looking for this podcast to go to, but the expectation is, there are going to be times where it's just going to be me sharing. I'm going to have, information. I'm going to talk through that information with you guys. Things that I found, in my research, online, things that I've experienced in life, things that people have shared with me that I want to share, again, and you're going to hear some things that I quote from, Apostle Amos L. Howard Sr. He says that, love always seeks to give the advantage. He says it all the time. He also says exposure expands your expectation. And if you're being exposed, if you've been exposed to so much and you truly love people and you want to see people grow, then you're going to expose them to things. You're going to grow their expectations. You're going to give them the information. And then they're going to go out, take that and get the inspiration that they need. And then, if they're flowing in that, then, they should see changes in their lives. And that's what I want to make sure that this podcast does and that I do, is that I'm helping people. And I'm helping myself through this, guys. Just to be totally transparent, I'm helping myself. So this podcast is therapeutic. If I had a setup, I would be on a couch, laid back with the microphone, in my face and be talking to you guys. because the stuff that I'm talking about, or the stuff that I experience, or I'm going to be sharing, this is information that I share with myself. I'm going to share with my family, or I've already shared with my family, things that we talk about, things that we want to know more about. And so, I'm going to bring on people that are experts in those areas. I'm going to bring on people with their stories, and they've gone from, working in the mailroom to, running a corporation. People that are in the entertainment industry, and some of the challenges and things that their story. I don't want everything to be necessarily focused on a challenge, but in life, you've got to overcome some things. Everybody that's on here has been an overcomer. If you wake up every day, you've overcome something. If you made it through the pandemic, you overcame quite a bit, mentally and physically. So these are things that I want to make sure they're being brought forth in this podcast. There are benefits to being an heir. And I want to make sure those are put out there. I want to make sure that people understand what those things are and be clear with it. Knowledge is power. And it is. Knowledge is power, but it's only power if you use it for the purpose of bettering yourself. If you have knowledge just for the sake of having it, then it's meaningless. You're the smartest person in your head, but you're not sharing that knowledge to help grow people. And that's what I'm about, And it's not, I'm not going to force you to do, I can't force you. My listeners, I want you guys to understand. I'm not forcing my opinions on you. I'm not forcing anything. I want you to again, like Dr. Mike Freeman said, I'm going to give you the information and allow you to draw your own inspiration. But I want you to hear my story, other people's stories around this stuff, so that way you know that you can do it. That you can do it if they can do it. God is not a respecter of person. What he does for one, he'll do for you. Doesn't mean it's the same. It may be a bigger level. It could be at a different level. There may be some differences, but he will do it for you. So that's my time. I really hope that this laid the foundation for what we're going to be talking about going forward. Like I said, I am very, very excited about this journey. Being able to sit here and talk, to the people and sharing my heart, in these areas, and I'm going to mess up, I'm going to grow through this. We're going to grow together. I definitely would love feedback. So if there's anybody, if you want to share feedback, if you've got things that you want to talk about or hear from this podcast, for ideas for shows, if you're interested in being a part of the show, you can email me at heirflowpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's Heirflow, HEIRFLOW podcast@gmail.com. So, I definitely want to hear from my listeners. It may not change my strategy or my viewpoint to some things. I'm not looking for emails to debate. But if there's information that you want to share, if there's things that that you want some clarity on, I definitely want to be able to address those things. And, I'm going to be checking that email all the time. So please feel free to reach out at airflowpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear from my listeners. If there's something that I need to do, if there's sound quality that needs to be adjusted, if there's, again, whatever it is, I want to hear the feedback. I am a person who, I don't mind receiving constructive criticism. I don't mind receiving feedback. I've been managing in corporate America IT for years, and I give feedback, and I always tell my team that works under me, I always tell them, this is a two-way street. I want to make sure that you understand what my expectations are, and I want to understand what your expectations are, and somewhere we have to meet in the middle, because at the end of the day, those expectations have to line up with the company's goals and objectives. Well, in this podcast, I have goals and objectives. I have things that God has given me, and I want to make sure that everything lines up with that. However, I want to hear from you, because there may be things that I just didn't think about. And sometimes, hearing it from somebody else may help me realize, hey, maybe I need to change that, or maybe I shouldn't have said that. Again, I'm not perfect, and I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm trying to be real. I'm trying to be transparent, and I want, I wanted the listeners to understand that this is coming from a place that is real. It's coming from a place that is genuine. And this isn't about me jumping on here to make a bunch of money. Now, my goal at one point would be to have enough listeners and, to grow this to a place where it's a bigger platform. But at the end of the day, I want to help people. And if helping people allows me to get closer to where God has for me in terms of, financial wealth, then I'm all for it. I'm all for it. So, again, I just want to thank you all for listening to me this episode. This is episode 1 of the Heir Flow Podcast, and I'm just excited again. I'm going to keep saying that because this is a journey that I've been waiting to start for a while, and I had to put the action in place. So I thank my wife for surprising me in buying this stuff early. As sort of my Father's Day gift. So I appreciate this. I thank you for investing in my vision. My wife, Cassandra Thomas, I just thank you so much. And you all will get a chance to hear from her as well on this show. She has a wealth of knowledge. Sometimes she acts like she doesn't want to talk. She's more of a behind the scenes person, but when you can get her to talk, she blows my mind every time, because she'll fight it, and then she'll get in front of everybody, or she'll start talking on something, and you can tell she's passionate about it, and she opens up, and I learned something new, and that's what I love about her, and that's what makes our marriage work. She pushes me to be great, and I push her to be great, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So not to sidetrack the conversation, but again, I just want to thank all of you for joining the podcast today. I hope you got something from this that will help you draw the inspiration that you need to make the changes in your life that you desire to change. I believe by faith that we're going to continue to grow and do bigger and better things in this podcast, because I'm going to be growing with you guys through this journey. We're on it together. I'm not here because I got all the answers. I'm here because I love to talk about this stuff. I want to help people, and I like to be helped as well. So the people that we're going to talk to, the information I'm going to be sharing, these are things that I'm going to be putting into place in my life, information that I'm going to turn into inspiration for me and my family, and we're going to grow. And my prayer is that we all grow together. So again, thank you for tuning in. I hope to see you all soon in our next episode of Heir Flow. And remember, as an heir, you were created to flow. So flow on.